today's episode of What Will People Think. I am beyond excited that we have an amazing guest today, Hala Gorani, an Emmy award-winning journalist, trailblazer, risk taker, and she's got a brand new book out called But You Don't Look Arab.
But you don't look Arab, and neither do you, Sara.
Which is why when I saw this book, I went, because I have never felt a title speak to me more.
Yeah.
And I think part of the reason why I wrote my novel is because of this introspection.
Yeah.
I was trying to understand my roots. And when I saw your title and the incredible journalistic career you've had, it's just, I couldn't wait to get my hands on it. There's so much I want to talk to you about. Let's begin with your background a little bit. Mm-hmm. Tell me a little bit about yourself.
So my parents were both from Aleppo, so you can imagine that recent developments in Syria have been of great interest to me. I've just returned from Damascus. I was born in Seattle and then raised mainly in France. My mother and father divorced when I was 6, and I moved with my mother and brother to Paris, and my father remained in the US. So I was kind of always going back and forth between the two countries. So I had both a very foreign sort of origin for someone living in a Western country, and I was always moving between France and the US. So all of that made me very transient and itinerant, and I felt kind of out of place wherever I lived. And it's something that informed and my ultimately my sense of belonging or unbelonging, and that's what made me want to write this book. And as I think you told me just before we started chatting, writing a book is a very cheap form of therapy. And it's quicker. It took only a year and a half. And so that's kind of where I landed in my early 50s, having worked in journalism for 25 years. I thought, I'm going to take a year and I'm going to write this book about my career in journalism, about what it's like being an Arab woman working in mainstream Western media. And while I do that, I want to also explore the history of my family and of the region and how all of these things intersect.
It's amazing. And, you know, as you were talking about where you were born, where you lived, mm-hmm. and where you've moved around, it takes you about 10 minutes to describe where you're from.
Yeah.
And I think this is what I connected with, because my heritage is Palestinian,
yeah.
but I grew up in Greece. I'm American by citizenship. Mm-hmm. I was born in Kuwait. It's just, you end up having a lot of qualifiers mm-hmm. to try to explain yourself. Mm-hmm. And do you feel like this search is ongoing for you? Do you feel like after you've written the book, you have a better idea of what you wanted to feel? You mentioned earlier, again, before when we were chatting, you said at some point the introspection stops. That gives me hope.
No, I have to say, I think I've turned that page, mm-hmm. and I think it was a necessary exercise, a midlife exercise. And all of these things that made me maybe feel like I didn't belong, like I should have been, especially as a child, you want nothing more than to be like everyone else and have a name that sounds like everyone else's name. I mean, I grew up in France where my name is Hala and people don't pronounce the H, mm-hmm. okay? So I became Allah, which is like not very, in the butt of every joke and you name it. Anyway, I've heard them all. If anyone has an original joke, please send it my way. But I think also there is something to be said for not constantly engaging in introspection. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's a very narcissistic, in the end, can be rather a very narcissistic exercise. And I really enjoy going back to the roots of especially the female members of my family from 100 years ago, retracing that journey. And as I said, kind of overlapping that family journey and the story of the region with my own journalistic career. Now I feel very much at home wherever I am. And it sounds cliche and even a little cheesy, but I feel like that journey's been kind of, okay, of course, you can always then, every once in a while, kind of dig deep in yourself and try to figure out what motivates you or your actions or where you're going to go next. Am I going to spend the next 10 years in journalism? Will I write a book? Whatever. But at the same time, I think that fundamental introspection is very, very well achieved by writing this type of book.
And I feel that. I mean, mine is a work of fiction, mm-hmm. but it did involve researching my heritage a little bit and trying to understand Palestinian roots and mm-hmm. diaspora. And I do feel like I've turned that page. My second novel doesn't have anything to do with that part of my life. It actually takes place in Greece.
Well, you know what
Has
they
to do
say
with
about
tech.
the first novel is always a work of autobiography in a sense, right?
Okay, which
So
makes sense.
that's kind of that, because you put all of what you have, all the questions, all those big emotional kind of tension points, all of these things that have been kind of in your head for years, because ultimately by the time you get to the point that you have a narrative for a novel, these are all issues that have been in your head for years that you want to explore even through fiction, but they're yours.
Yes.
Yeah.
And for me, it was about digging deep so that when my kids ask me questions, I have kind of an informed answer, something that's well thought out.
Okay.
Yeah. And to be completely honest, I wrote this book trying to take breaks from them during the pandemic because it was just so full on. I was working full time. I had a job as an editor-in-chief at Google, homeschooling 2 kids during the pandemic.
Wow.
And I was so
And you still managed to
overwhelmed.
write a novel in the middle of all that?
This was my joy. It was like my meditative, mommy's going to hide upstairs. She's got a meeting for half an hour. And I would just, spin these beautiful sentences. So this was my attempt at uplifting myself, and hopefully it uplifts others. But your book uplifted me.
Oh, thank you.
Because I love reading about your success. And we try to talk about what is a measure of success. And for me, you've really achieved that. And I can't wait to see what you do next. I feel like you keep inventing these new chapters in your life. And I love that. So you've been,
I'm so
in
glad
front of the
that
camera for so long. And now you've produced this beautiful work, and it reads like fiction. Your sentences are beautiful.
Oh, thank you so much. And I cannot tell you how happy I am that you said that, because I think that, ultimately for me, it might not be for everybody, but maybe the key to being happy is also forcing yourself, kind of propelling yourself forward into new chapters. And if you feel like your job is repetitive or your life is becoming a little bit routine, which mine was after a while, then, just do something else. What's the worst that can happen? And so there was the book, and now I work for NBC News, and now I'm really covering, doing a lot more field work, which is something that I missed a lot when I was an anchor. And hopefully I have an idea for a novel. We'll see how that goes. But yeah, so I'm glad that you picked up on that, because it's a really important aspect of how I want to live my life now. And the older you get, the more, without wanting to sound morbid or anything, but the more you realize, look, time is kind of running out. You can't just spend the next 10 years figuring it out. You got to do it, and it's such a privilege to be able to do it, because not everybody has that privilege. I see the people we cover in the region, the poverty, the displacement, the wars, even people in Western countries that are living paycheck to paycheck, who have children and who could never dream of leaving their day job. I have that privilege, and I cannot tell you how thankful I am that I have it. I never take it for granted.
And you're creating beautiful work out of it. And you're reporting on such important stories too.
Yeah, thank you.
For me as a journalist, I've spent a lifetime telling other people's stories, and it felt like time to tell my own, which is where this come in. And I just wanted to go back to your start in journalism. So what made you want to tell stories for a living at the beginning? You clearly had a knack for it, but do you remember a defining moment where it became a career?
I mentioned in the book a couple of moments. So the first one was when I was 10 years old, and there was an assassination attempt on Ronald Reagan. And I remember there was no cable news at the time, and I must have picked up the story by watching a special report on TV. And I remember when my dad got home that evening, I told him about it. And the way I told him about it was with a lot of kind of detail, and I was like recounting what I'd heard. And of course, there was shock on his face. At the time, there were no cell phones, there was no internet, there was no social media. So people would literally learn about stuff happening because someone tells them, or because they hear it on the radio, or the next day when they read it in the paper. So I think I remember my dad coming home and me telling him, this was in Washington, D.C., and there was a look of shock on his face. He said, "What, did he die?" And I said, "No, apparently he's only injured." And I start giving all this like detail about what we heard from hospital officials and things like that. And then I thought, "Ooh, this is kind of like, there's something fulfilling about this, about retelling the story." Then when I was in boarding school, in my teens is when I started taking photos and taking photography classes. And I thought, I want to become a photojournalist. The problem is I'm a terrible photographer, and I mean really bad. And so it was just, I had to admit to myself that this wasn't going to be what I was going to be good at. But then I started writing articles. And then, when I started doing that, I realized I was much better at writing than taking photos. And from then on, I always knew I wanted to be a journalist, which also is a huge privilege, because some people, and it's not good or bad, but some people, discover a little later in life what they want to do. Whereas I'd never had that hesitation ever. I always knew.
But I had that hesitation because my parents didn't believe that it was a good
the Arab
job.
parents.
It was that Arab
Did they
parent
want you to be a
thing.
doctor or an engineer?
Try again.
Lawyer?
One more.
Banker.
Banker.
Banker, of course, yes.
Yeah.
You have one of four.
Yep.
Doctor, engineer, lawyer,
That's it.
banker.
So, I had the good grades. I was the good student.
Yeah.
Studied business, did banking for a couple of years, and I found it so soulless.
Yeah.
And I realized that other people around me, my colleagues, didn't. They loved it.
Yeah.
So we'd go on lunch breaks, and they would be looking up stock market prices, and I'm sitting there reading a novel. It was a complete misfit moment.
I think that when you have a creative impulse and a creative soul, these professions that focus more on kind of like banking, where it's more on the trade and the number and the achievement, and it's less about creating something out of nothing.
Yes.
So it's much more moving things around, and you can be very good at it and be a very successful banker. But if you have a creative kind of a desire to produce something out of nothing, as in come up with a product that was not there before, then banking won't be for you.
Exactly. And I think you used the perfect word for it earlier. You said you were telling your father the story, and it was very fulfilling.
Yeah.
So I always say that the artistic fulfillment that I got out of writing stories and interviewing people was so much more than any paycheck at the end of the month that I would have gotten from my better paid job at a bank.
For sure. I mean, for me, not for everybody, money is, but then I have to caveat that with, of course, you have to be able to pay your bills and all of that. So this is, again, a position of I'm very much in a position of privilege. But ultimately, I did give up a lot of income to write a book and do something else, less than, say, I was earning as a TV anchor. But there's never a day that I regret it.
Amazing. I want to hear about your TV anchor days.
Yeah.
Tell me about that first time getting in front of the camera and how that all happened.
So I was working for Bloomberg for 2 years. It was my first job. I was 25 years old, and it was a French language Bloomberg TV startup that was distributed on some obscure satellite network. It was like channel 852 from 5 a.m. to 8 a.m. And the only person watching was like my mother. And I know this because one day I missed my slot. There was no control room. I don't know if people listening to this know what a control room is, but there was no like producer behind a bank of TV screens and everything. Everything was computerized. So your slot was at this time. The computer switched the camera on, whether someone was sitting in the chair or not. And one day I missed my slot, and the computer turned itself on, and there was an empty chair. And you saw me kind of running from the back of the newsroom to the chair. So that was my first experience anchoring. And I realized that this was a job I could do well when it was something I did almost without much effort. I didn't have to put much thought into it. We ad-libbed a lot. It was financial news journalism. So there was nothing about it that was, in terms of the framing. It was like doing the weather. The framing was always the same, and either stocks are up or they're down or they're going sideways. Just sectors going up. It's quite formulaic, but at the same time, you could allow yourself to be completely creative and just make up sentences that were as poetic as you wanted them to be. And after a while, we got a little bit bored with it. And so we'd give each other challenges to use certain words in our live shots. And that was what ended up being, and then that's what made me realize that anchoring for me was something that was a natural fit. But I continued to do field work throughout after I joined CNN, especially after 9/11.
Did you feel nerves at the beginning? Was there ever that trajectory of building the confidence? Or did you feel like you were at home when you were in front of the camera?
I think probably, no, there were no nerves necessarily. The nerves maybe a little bit more when I had to do reporting from the field, because that I felt like the weight of the responsibility on me was bigger. So if it was a big breaking news story and we're out in the field somewhere, then I feel a little bit nervous in the beginning, but then it dissolves quickly. Yeah, it's not like something that has been an issue.
Because you're so natural in front of the camera. The only reason I ask is if you have advice for people who might feel nervous when they find themselves in front of a screen.
I actually do have a little bit of advice. So I think importantly, don't try to speak too quickly. If you need to search for a word, search for a word. It's a natural way of speaking. Don't always look at the camera. If you're, for example, a reporter or an anchor, you can look down at your notes. You can just treat it as a conversation as opposed to necessarily trying to almost recite a lesson. In the beginning, it's quite normal to be nervous and to not want to mess up. And so you become the cadence is a little bit too fast, and sometimes you're not as natural, and sometimes you maybe, especially if you're doing a report in the field and you don't have a prompter, so you're so worried that you're going to say the wrong word that you end up rattling millions of facts. I would say take your time.
Okay.
And don't worry if you stumble. It's not a big deal. The viewers really forgive a stumble. They don't forgive mistakes. So it's better to be deliberate and slow, and they can forgive mistakes, but if you make a big mistake, it's hard to recover from that. So it's good to
understandably,
take your time, be natural, think of this as a conversation as much as possible.
And that responsibility, it's a big deal when you're doing the field work or breaking stories. Especially
if you're covering certain stories where everybody's listening to every word that you're saying. That's also an issue. So you have to be very, very cognizant of the fact that you are, the terms that you use, you have to carefully use them. And if you use terms that not everyone agrees on, you have to source them. So all of that has to happen while you're also live on TV and you have really no prompters. So you have to be a little bit careful. So it's better to be slower than to
slow down.
Yes, slow down.
So after Bloomberg, you moved to CNN.
Yeah.
And you started reporting on some of the biggest stories and interviewing world leaders.
Not right away. It took me a while to get to that. I was a financial news reporter for 2 years, and I was very bored. And I would just beg my bosses to send me to cover news stories.
So you were craving that?
Always. Then when 9/11 happened and the Iraq War, especially in 2003, that's when all the networks needed Arabic-speaking journalists who were willing to travel and go to war zones and things like this. And then little by little, I ended up just kind of doing that. And then one of my best chapters, since we're talking about chapters, was a show called Inside the Middle East. I anchored that show for 7 years. And this will be of interest to you because it's, I think, what this podcast is about, which is how when you report on non-crisis stories, so for example, Palestinian embroidery or Jordanian centers that care for, children with disabilities, whatever it is, or, comedians, Arab American comedians, which I also did at the very beginning of that show, you're essentially basically covering what that story is really about. Because only covering a region when there's a war or a revolution is like only talking to somebody when they're having, like a nervous breakdown. That's not the way to know them. So to know somebody and to know a region, you have to know it when it's not in crisis as well. So also so that you can compare the two periods. So when I went to Syria a couple weeks ago. I've known Syria my whole life. I reported from that region for a long time, and that's why it's so important to have a diverse newsroom, so that the people reporting on the region are people who know that region outside of crisis moments. Parachuting into a place is there, it has its advantages. I mean, I went to Ukraine and I'd never set foot in Ukraine, but at the same time, did I bring the same depth of understanding? I mean, I had the same depth of journalism, I hope, but the same depth of understanding to the story, where I understand the language, I understand the nuance, I understand when someone is joking versus being sarcastic versus being a little rude, all of those things. And then I hope I bring that to an audience where if you are humanizing a region, you are building a bridge. That's not my role as a journalist, but that's one of the happy byproducts of my job as a journalist, is ultimately you are opening up a world to someone who doesn't know that world. You're the vector, you're the conduit. And that's how I see myself.
I think it's so important. And I think you've told many of these incredible stories, and they're so necessary. One of my favorite authors, Nigerian, Chimamanda Adichie. So she has this great TED Talk where she talks about the dangers of a single story. And she says that all of the stories that you might hear, for example, about Nigeria might be related to war, or Palestine, same thing. But what is it like? What is the culture like outside of these moments of crisis?
Absolutely.
It's what you're saying. So I completely agree with that.
Absolutely. It's so important because ultimately, and that's why also it's a positive development that this region, the Arab region, now has its own news channels, because ultimately these stories will be told by Arabs for Arabs. But I think it's still important that because Western countries have such influence and such ultimately so much interest in what's going on in this part of the world, that the audiences in the US and elsewhere and online can see some of these stories that they haven't been exposed to before, outside of moments of crisis. For example, I was just in, as I mentioned, Syria, and on my Instagram, I posted simple clips, nothing, not even, no narration, simple clips of me just going to the market or buying a sandwich, or what was the one that got a lot of pickup? Oh, when I was, we went to Ghouta, the suburb of Damascus that was very severely bombed, and just walking through the damage and the destruction, no narration, just slice of life. People crave that because, and by the way, by that time, it was me and one other Western crew in Syria, and everybody had left because they were all there the first few weeks, and then they moved on to the next story. So I'm very thankful that NBC allowed me to go back.
It's amazing. And I love that you went there. And I was going to say, I feel like it's a universal thing, trying to understand each other. You were saying the Western influence and trying to share stories from the region that are maybe a little more, I'll say, accurate or bird's eye view.
Or humanizing, I think. Yeah, humanizing.
One of my closest friends from college, Anna, she's Colombian. And I was telling her that I just watched a Netflix show that was so good, Griselda,
Oh, yeah, Griselda, yeah.
And she's like, oh, another show about a drug cartel. Like, this is not what Colombia is about.
But it was so good.
It was so good. That's what I said. I was like,
good.
It's an excellent show. I binge watched that whole thing. But then a small part of me was like, she's kind of right. Because so much of the material that I've consumed in these shows is around that. But that's not her whole culture. And here I was doing it. But in the Middle East, we get that all the time. And that's part of the reason that I'm also trying to contribute in a small way to the conversation
but your
with
book
my book.
I'll tell you why your book will be very, very impactful and interesting. Now, I'm going to completely go off here on a sidebar, but the movie Parasite, the Korean movie that won the Oscar, and then also Squid Game, the first season. The second one, I have to say I wasn't too much into it, but so those are both dystopian, kind of class inequality works, etc. But there was something about seeing that series and that film in Korean and reading the subtitles, and then also the kind of character development and some of the more moving and touching moments in each one. I guess in some ways humanized a culture to me that I knew nothing about beyond what you know about Korea or what you think you know about Korea. So, for example, when an Arab American comedian appears like Rami Youssef or like Mo Amer, who I just met for the first time a few weeks ago, who's amazing.
Nice.
When they're on Netflix and they make Americans and Westerners, in addition to Arabs, laugh, that person becomes a human being and not always a political object.
Exactly.
The thing is that to always be seen through the prism of politics is unfair and exhausting, and in some ways a bit dehumanizing, because that means you're nothing but a political actor. What sect are you? Which side do you support? You know, what do you think of America when it did this and that? It's tiring. You just want to talk about the Netflix series you just watched.
And I mean, I want to give you a hug when you say that, because it just feels like the backgrounds that we come from it's just such a politicized identity.
Yeah,
and
always.
I've spent my whole life, whether in the States, I spent a big chunk of my life there, or even in Greece where I grew up, or here, you always have to qualify who you are a bit, or your views or where you come from. Sometimes it's not even in an intentionally harmful way. I've been to weddings where these hungry mothers of sons were looking for brides for their sons, and they're asking me, what religion are you and what sect? Because they're trying to pair you up, and it's just... It is exhausting. Yeah, it is exhausting. Every stage, from every
comes
angle.
from all sides, it has to be said. But again, I think social media is helping. So social media is obviously sometimes very damaging in that it spreads misinformation and conspiracy theories ad nauseum. And I think it's made us in some ways a bit collectively not necessarily smarter. But in other ways, it really opens the door to other cultures in ways that you would not have been exposed to. You know, a Lebanese person having a cooking Instagram is a great thing, or a Syrian just simply, filming their day-to-day life, that type of thing. Or your Colombian friend probably wouldn't be talking about drug cartels on her Instagram, hopefully. But so yeah, social media has helped. And I think mainly with the very younger demographic, where people are exposed to, it's changed, for example, how Middle Eastern politics have been consumed quite a lot.
And it's stories that may not make it onto the news.
Yeah, exactly. Either they don't make it, or they make it in another form. Or I think for me, what this has taught me is CNN International, when I used to work there, was a great place to work for one reason, which was that the newsrooms were diverse. So I would always advocate for a diverse newsroom, because you always bring your worldview to your story. It's not biased. It's very different. It's your worldview. So what story am I attracted to naturally? What characters in a story, and by characters I mean people I'm covering in a story, would I highlight versus the ones that I might not highlight as much? So that story will be my way of seeing that story. Having ticked every, of course, professional news gathering, fact-checking box, that goes without saying. But let's say a man originally from, I don't know, Italy is in the same newsroom. That man is not going to cover that story the way I'm going to cover it.
It's true.
So, but if, let's say we've gone through the fact-checking, sourcing stage, how will he cover that story is going to be different. So that's why it's so important to have both a constellation of diverse, I think, identities and profiles. That's the reason I think diversity is important, because ultimately then one news channel will have a pretty kind of, complete worldview, hopefully. And CNN International was very good with that. You have a Sudanese woman, an American, somebody originally Syrian, another one originally Libyan, lots of Brits, a few Americans, and that's why I think in that sense, it was well put together, that newsroom.
That's great, and I cannot wait to get into the book and to more of your CNN experiences.
So Sarah, like me, you also grew up all over the place and were born to Arab parents in another country, right?
Yeah, and that's why I couldn't wait to pick up your book, because I've never seen myself reflected so much in somebody.
What was your journey, though, specific journey? Because you're originally Palestinian,
Yeah,
right?
so both sets of grandparents are from Yafa, so even the village is the same. But then my father's side went to Beirut. My dad grew up there, went to AUB, and he left in the 70s when the Civil War broke out. His family moved to California. He moved to Kuwait for work, where he met my mother. So my mom's side had moved to Kuwait. At the time, the Gulf region absorbed, I think, a lot of people from Palestine, and my family was one of them, educators. And they married in the 80s. The Gulf War broke out. And then we ended up moving to California briefly before we resettled in Greece. But I think all of this gave me that hunger for other people's stories and understanding what makes cultures really similar. I think this is why I became a journalist. Like, you can plop me in any room, I'll make friends with everybody.
But I think part of what I write about in my book is when you ask people questions about themselves, you're really, in some roundabout way, you're trying to answer questions about you, right? Especially if it's somebody, and I write about covering the Haiti earthquake and how I ended up in this liquor shop with this white man behind a counter, loading up a truck of bottles onto, to kind of drive it out of town so that looters wouldn't get to it. And I asked the guy where he's from, and he tells me he's from Syria and from Aleppo as well. And so we have this spark, this moment of kind of kinship. We have nothing in common. We're never going to see each other again. But here we are, these two kind of floating planets in this cosmos that collide for half a second. And that just kind of, and he's the one who gave me the idea for the book title, because he said, I would never have guessed you were from Syria. You don't even look Arab. So I thought, if I ever write a book, that's going to be the title of it. Because if some guy in the middle of Port-au-Prince after an earthquake, that's the first thing that comes to his mind, then I feel like we need to explore this.
You're looking for a moment of connection amid the chaos. But that was the opening scene, right?
Yeah, that's the opening. Yeah, that's the preface.
I mean, there are some incredible lines. Can I share some of my favorites?
Of course.
Because you mentioned in here that you are not a risk taker, but you were a war reporter. That had risk.
Well, I'm not a war reporter in the way some people are war reporters. So I'll go to a conflict zone, but I'm not a risk taker in the sense that I am very careful. I'm very deliberate. I'm not at all reckless. Then the rest is luck of the draw. I mean, are you going to step on a mine? Then you're just very unlucky. But I will do everything in my power not to end up in the minefield. Let's just put it that way.
That's a good way to live.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. You had a really great line here. You said, we all wanted to know how he'd be. Oh, so this is when you were listening to people under the rubble, earthquake in Haiti. And you're saying, we wanted to know how he would be able to keep going when so many others would have let go. As a journalist, I record the time, the place, the facts. As a human being, I want to know why some people don't break. And I loved that line.
That is so true. But that is what our job, it makes me, it's so funny you should have picked up that line, because it still makes me emotional. Part of our job is putting a camera in people's faces when they're going through the worst time of their life, right? And you have some people that break and some people don't. And I always think to myself, what is it about that person that is allowing them to persevere? And I try to absorb that. For example, we did a story on journalists in Gaza. And it was part of a 3-part series on the very high number of deaths among journalists in Gaza in particular. And one of the journalists we profiled, Noor Swirky, was laughing and smiling, and she had to send her kids away, and she lived in a tent, and she's like, she had written a sign, handwritten a sign with on her tent that said Noor's tent, making light of everything, and still had beautifully made up, her makeup was applied beautifully. She made an effort so that her appearance was nice and everything. And I thought, would I be that person in Gaza after a year of living in a tent without my kids? trying to report when, half the press corps or something is either dead or injured or displaced? I don't know. And same with this guy. Like this guy, Wisman Jean-Pierre, I remember his name. He didn't break. 11 days under the rubble, drinking Coca-Cola and beer from the hotel bar, and made it out alive.
It's just an incredible story.
Yeah.
And it's what you're saying. And I think maybe being so close to death and to the nonsensical aspect of life, like how can this happen to some people and not others? Maybe it just makes you grasp for those moments of joy, the Coca-Cola and the hotel, or the makeup on Noor's face. Because, I mean, what else? How else are you going to make sense of this?
I cannot stress enough how much in our job we realize that nothing that happens to you is because you deserve it.
Yeah.
It's all about luck, right? Are you born here or are you born there? Did you lose your parent as a child and that traumatized you, or did you not? Or do you have your parents well into your midlife? Did you get cancer and then recover, or get cancer and then lost a vital organ? I don't know, whatever it is. Nothing. People think, well, why don't they just? There's a lot of victim blaming. But you realize it's nothing but luck of the draw, right?
Completely.
I mean, I could have been one of the Syrians on a boat in 2015, but instead I was one of the Syrians whose parents had the means to leave in the 60s, and I was born in America. So,
yep. Same thing. If my grandparents hadn't had the privilege and extended family living in other countries, they would have stayed in Palestine. That could easily be me.
Exactly.
Right now.
You could be, and I write about these.
There's a bit of survival guilt there.
There is a bit, and maybe that's why covering these stories is so important to me, because I feel like I need to. I don't know. It's like paying back your good fortune. You have to pay back somehow, because you feel like there has to be some balance redressed here. But when I covered the Syrians in 2015, who were traveling from Turkey to Greece and then hoping to make it to Germany and Sweden, that big migratory biblical kind of movement of people almost. I just felt like I needed to cover this so that I could be grateful for what I have, but B, also just tell the story so that there's a bit of balance brought back to the universe, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I agree with you. And for me, it was through print. I mean, I wrote for the New York Times for 6 years on art and culture from the Middle East. It was my way of just contributing this drop in the ocean of, hey, there's more to this part of the world than oil and war. But sometimes it can feel very lonely. And that's why stories like yours are also really necessary and inspiring. They're just so moving. And you've had this incredible career and won all the Emmys and all of that. And I mean, I've read your book and I'm so moved by it. And it's hard for me to even pick certain scenes to discuss with you. So I wanted to ask you, when you think back maybe to your time at CNN, is there a standout moment or story that you really loved reporting on that moved you?
Well, I think both when I reported on it and now in hindsight with what's happening in Syria, it was probably the Arab Spring. I mean, the Arab Spring in Cairo, when we really couldn't believe what we were seeing. And we really thought this was the dawn of a new era for the Arab world. Of course, as we all know, that didn't end up happening at all. And after the Arab Spring in Syria, probably the most repressive response to any pro-democracy demonstrations happened there. And so full circle to today, I think to myself, wow, this is a story that, I covered when it started, and I really covered kind of not maybe where it ended, but where it came, where it really we're at a 360-degree kind of moment. Now it can go in several different directions, but it will never be, I don't think, and I hope that I'm right, as bad as what we saw with the Assad regime. And right now, the signs in Syria are slightly encouraging in that, more than slightly encouraging, in that everything is quite calm. The country is broken, but I think the leaders now are wanting to get sanctions lifted and to get the economy going, and are certainly not behaving in a way that I am necessarily finding in it. That I'm right now. I think we can be. There's no real fear here that something is going to unravel in the immediate future. So there's that. But when I first started covering the Arab Spring, I really felt it emotionally, of course, because this was a region that I'd seen governed by autocratic regimes my whole life. And I was the age you are now when that happened, which is 41.
25.
And
41 and proud.
And proud, exactly. I'm 54 and proud. There you go. But so I felt it very deeply emotionally. But I think ultimately, what story did I really love actually reporting on? It probably wasn't that. Maybe it was that series of stories that I did for Inside the Middle East, where it was kind of bouncing around the region. This was pre-Arab Spring. So bouncing around the region and just doing a story on kind of slice of life stuff. I think those are some of my favorite moments. Because
there's a bit of creative freedom there also to choose.
A ton of creative freedom. I basically didn't have a boss on that show. Like it was a half-hour monthly feature show that really tried to avoid politics. So I loved it because nobody was kind of
doing that.
I mean, there was the fact checking and certainly the scripts had to go through at least another pair of eyes just to be sure. But there wasn't like on some of these stories like 12 cooks in the kitchen doing rewrites and asking for this paragraph to be removed or moved or whatever. So it really felt like it was my little video diary every month.
That's great. And then you went even further by writing a memoir. I want to know what sparked that. What made you want to tell this story after reporting on all these incredible things? And one of the many things I've admired about you is your drive. So what made this the next chapter for you that made sense?
So I think it was both wanting to explore my identity, but also the history of my family and the region, because all of these things evolved in ways that mirror each other. So I wanted to tell the story of especially the women in my family from the turn of the century, of the last century to today for me. And telling that story was a way also to be, I think to bear witness and to keep the record for, I wanted it to be somehow a book of a record of a Syrian family displaced multiple times and what that's like historically and how that impacted me personally, and then where my journalism fits in all of that. So that was my motivation. My motivation was to explore identity over several generations and throughout history in the Middle East, and hopefully have it resonate with people who are from other parts of the world, not necessarily the Middle East. So maybe your Colombian friend.
I'll tell Anna to pick it up.
Tell her there is no talk of cartels whatsoever.
She'll be happy to hear that. Yes. But also, I think I was immediately attracted to the title. So, and I knew based on your incredible work history that it was going to be smart and that it was going to dive deep. But I think one thing that surprised me was how beautiful the language is.
Oh, well, thank
to the
you.
extent that it felt like poetic at times. I've read some of the lines that I loved. Were you always writing on the side? Where did this writing flair come from? Do you read a lot?
So I don't read
express yourself beautifully in words.
I have to say I do not read as much at all as I should be reading.
Until now.
And until What Will People Think by Sara Hamdan, future bestseller. I don't, unfortunately. I read about, okay, I'm going to be honest, okay, because I'm not going to overstate how. I read a lot of news, so that every single day.
And that's what I was prepared for. I expected this to be a little more like a documentary style or factual. But this parts of it, I mean, the part when you talk about your grandmother being taken to the Turkish harem.
Yes,
all of
that's
that.
wild.
I felt like I was watching a show about, Harim Sultan.
I know people have told me that should be a whole separate story, because I think that would be a really good
Inspiration for a
separate
novel
story.
one day,
Maybe, but that's not the one I'll write first, but maybe another one based on that. I write it. To be honest, I read about a novel every maybe 2 months. So what that's about 6 or 7 novels a year, a ton of news. But I'm really going to change that. That's my 2025 resolution, and I've joined a book club.
Oh, that's good.
So that's
now
good.
you have a new book to choose for your book club.
That's true.
But the writing style that you have such a distinct voice.
Thank
I think
you so
a lot
much.
of writers work very hard to craft something that is innate in you.
Thank you.
And I really hope you end up working on more novels or books or something to do with the written word.
So you've done this, maybe you can give me advice. So I have the novel idea mapped out already. I have the characters mapped out. I have the whole plot, the narrative, the arc, everything. I guess my question is, how do I know that it's going to work as a story? I mean, I don't know. That's going to be my question. That's been my question. When I start, how do I know? I think it's a fantastic story, but at the same time, how do I know that it's going to work? I don't know. It's kind of a question.
You've built an entire career on having a good nose for stories. So if you feel that it's a good one, I have zero doubt that it's going to be a good one. And I think it's just a different medium.
Yeah.
Earlier you were saying that you were interested in photojournalism, but you thought that you sucked. I have a feeling that you were an excellent photographer.
Oh, believe me, no. I'm not at all this is not false modesty. I can tell you I can write, I cannot take a photo, and I married a photographer. And he'll agree with me. He's like, yeah, no. But now with phones, you can add a filter, you can whatever. I'm talking about when you had to actually take photos with cameras that were analog. So you have to have
when
the
it comes to writing, you have a definite clear knack. I'm sure that it'll be great.
Well, I hope so. Anyway, I think I'll do it this year. Now, the way I wrote that book is that I had nothing else going on. So every morning I would wake up, I would have a cup of coffee, I'd walk the dog, routine, 4 hours a day. I'd sit at 11 a.m., which is late for a lot of people, but for me, that was the exact right time, 11 a.m., and I would write all the way to 3 p.m. And so those 4 hours, come rain, come shine, no matter what. At 3 p.m., I'd have a huge lunch and then a very light dinner after. And that was how I did it, regardless of whether I felt inspired or not inspired. So as a result, the writing part of it was not very long. It was more the editing that took a really long time. So for the novel, I don't think I could combine writing a novel and working almost full time as a reporter. I couldn't, because there's too much travel. I'd suddenly have to leave it for 3 weeks and then come back. So I'd have to carve out a solid 3-month period with no travel just to get it get it going.
Yeah, or create a new routine.
Yeah.
Where instead of every day, it's just a couple of times a week.
Yeah.
And it's shorter periods.
Yeah.
I mean, that's part of the reason why it took me so long.
How long did it take you?
I started this 10 years ago.
Wow.
But I was working full time. I had 2 children, the pandemic. So I was time poor.
Yeah.
But I just really, really wanted to tell the story. And like you, I had my routine. So every morning I would drop my children off at school, work out, and then sit with my cup of coffee, and I would write until work started.
Okay.
But so it's shorter.
So that gave you how many hours?
At most 45 minutes.
A day, just about. Yeah. And on weekends, you could add more? Or?
I have children that are too noisy. But we got through it.
But you got through it.
How
many words?
86,000 words.
Not that you counted.
Not that I counted. 86,105. What would you say to somebody traveling to the Middle East for the first time that maybe has some preconceived notions?
Well, okay. So as you know, I'm going to ask you now. It depends where in the Middle East. So I wouldn't recommend just crossing the Sinai on your own without whatever. But if you come here, this lovely city of Dubai, it's very safe. It's probably safer than a lot of American cities, and I do like that. And there are plenty of Americans here, so I would say this is one of the misconceptions about the Middle East is that there's danger lurking everywhere. Which there's some places I would recommend being careful. Let's be clear. But generally speaking, it's very welcoming, and Middle Eastern culture. on an individual basis is extremely friendly and welcoming.
Everyone's trying to feed you too much.
Too much, yeah. To the point where you're like, that I've eaten like 16 cookies and had 3 cups of tea. I'm good.
It's only day one.
Yes, exactly.
And you're here for the Emirates Airline Festival of Literature.
Yeah.
Are you excited to be here for it? What are your panels going to be about?
So I have 2 panels. So one about the book itself, which I believe is Saturday, and the other one is about media in the Arab world. And I'm really excited to talk about that because it's part of what we were discussing, which is that all these new media platforms that didn't exist when I started out, when CNN was the only channel on TV, and now it's one of, 45 different news channels from all over the world, including so many from this part of the world. And in the same way, I think diversity in a newsroom is important. I think also diversity in the media landscape is important because every network, every platform is going to have its own kind of probably style or worldview or whatever it is. And I think it's very important to have a choice, and people are better informed for it.
And just a final question. I called this podcast What Will People Think? Because yes, it's the title of my novel, but also I'm just trying to showcase risk takers and trailblazers and people who've really carved an interesting path. So what advice would you give somebody who's scared to take that step into their dream or a job in journalism or whatever it is? What makes you take that step?
I'll tell you, there's really one thing. You have to do it because you are so empowered when that idea you've had in your mind or that ambition you've had in your mind for many years, it's only a thought. And when that thought becomes even the beginning of an action, suddenly doors open, ideas pop in your head, and you feel in charge. You feel in charge. The chances that this initiative will fail, very high. How many rejections did you get for this book?
So this one, so far so good. I had written a previous manuscript, over 20 rejections, and this was the second attempt, whole new story.
So I got 28 rejections.
Yeah.
And the number of stories I've pitched that were rejected, it's just incalculable. I guess my point is, do it in the sense that don't think it, do it. Just do it. You have an idea for a story, open your computer and start writing it. You have an idea for a podcast, research what it takes to get the equipment for the podcast, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Just do the act. The thought is ultimately not worth a lot.
Yeah, we stand in our own way sometimes.
And you're thinking that you're not succeeding when in fact you're not really trying that hard. And it's not blaming the person. All I'm saying is that sometimes we just get so worried that we're not going to make it. Just do it. Just start writing the story, or write the pitch if you don't want to write the story, or write the structure if you don't want to write the pitch. Just do something, and then close your computer and then look at it the next day. You will feel so good. Just so empowered. Yeah. Trust me on this one.
Because life is short.
Not just because life is short, because just do it. Like, otherwise it's a thought. And I feel like thoughts are a little bit like, it's
noise.
It's noise. It's non-tangible. It's just, it clutters your mind unless it turns into something you can touch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I had a first manuscript, was getting a bunch of rejections, kept going, and then I started to meditate daily. And that's where that concept of your thoughts are actually noise and you're getting in your own way. Completely. And I kept telling myself, nobody's going to care about a story that features an Arab American woman. Is this too niche? Is this big enough?
Yeah.
But it was only when the meditation started and I stopped overthinking that suddenly the doors opened. It's exactly what you said. Yeah. Somehow by doing it, I was able to take charge, and the rest of the pieces fell into place. Suddenly there was a Netflix award, won a spot in the fellowship, and now this book in your hands that took 10 years is the biggest book deal out of the Middle East.
Oh my goodness.
High six-figure. I know, there was a bidding war.
There was a bidding war.
Top 3 publishers all came in.
I am so incredibly
but I say
proud
that now.
to say that an Arab American, because I can say you're Arab American, woman has done this.
It is a historic moment, and I'm trying to celebrate it, but it's really come out of a place of having to believe in myself finally and stopping the thoughts. Meditation works. But thank you for being an amazing person who has accomplished so much.
And thank you, and I can't wait for this to be on the New York Times bestseller list.